All right, I'm Ned Butler. I'm joined here by my colleague Joe Aiello. We're just gonna share our screen and give you all a quick rundown on how to get Kentucky back on track. Alrighty, let's just jump in. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering in today's presentation. I kind of want to differentiate for you all what commuter rail, state supported, and long distance rail can all do for the state. We'll talk about, engaging stakeholders. What are the responsibilities of the transportation cabinet? What are the responsibilities of volunteers and advocates? I want to bring up some comparable service models as well, just to get your brains thinking about, potential routes, what it could look like, feasibility, that sort of thing. And then we'll just touch a little bit on federal grants and freight rail complications and participation and go over next steps. So a little bit about me. I'm the communications manager for Rail Passengers. We, as our host said, we're a nonprofit. We have staff all across the country, and we work on light rail, commuter rail, and Amtrak issues. I'm a BCTC grad, and I also went to Escoffier College of San Mateo. And currently I advise Amtrak food and beverage policy, and we both work in a number of surveying, researching, and advising capacities. And I've been a member of RPA as well as a member of staff since 2019, public transit passenger since 1990. Joe, I'll kick it over to you. You want to do your intro?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Aiello. I'm Director of Community Engagement and Organizing for the association. I've been on staff since 2018, but I actually started off as a volunteer member of we have a nonprofit council representatives from all over the country. I think we do represent all 50 states. We actually have very active members in Alaska and Hawaii, believe it or not. But I'm originally from Chicago. I lived in Massachusetts for a number of years. It's where I got my MPA at Northeastern. It's actually where I first got my start with the association, and I'm now back in the Midwest. And very happy. And I've it's funny you guys mentioned Nicholasville Road, things like that. Thanks to Ned and their friends and family being down from Kentucky. I've actually been through that way through work trips, so I kind of actually know what you guys are talking about. So from that, as the resident Yankee here, and it's nice to kind of you get an idea of what you're all talking about. So I'm just happy to be here and happy to help out.
So how do we begin as advocates? The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has created new opportunity for more towns to establish service and expand existing transit options. Together, we can navigate these advances in policy to create more and better service for more people. So as we were kind of thinking through this presentation, these were, the immediate questions that came to mind that we knew we had to answer before we get into Q&A and give you all some framework. So we're going to dive into these. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there was a massive amount of funding for rail transportation that was included in the passing of this and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which was the act that predated BIL. So there is tons of federal funding out there. The question is, how do we allocate it and what are we using it for? So what does it take to get commuter rail in Lexington? Will we be starting from scratch? So it requires a petition of the Transportation Cabinet to form an expression of interest to the FRA. This is a very simple process of signing a letter, just having Jim Gray sign a letter and having the secretary send it on to the FRA. A bunch of other states have already done this. Joe has been involved in the workshop to identify new potential corridors from communities that have submitted these letters. The next step is definitely developing resources to find funding for feasibility studies, route planning, construction, and acquisition. For now, I think really focusing on getting those studies handled, feasibility studies that look at demographics, environmental impact, economic impact, which I think will really help to drive the conversations you're going to have later on with elected officials and people who are policymakers in the area. So you want to look at existing commuter service in other regions and learn from their wins and losses preemptively. I think, much in the way that you all were saying, let's be proactive. Just familiarizing yourself with what it takes to get these kinds of services started and how other communities have done it can really help you stay ahead of the curve. And I'd be remiss if we did not also talk about Amtrak service. We work extensively with Amtrak in a number of states across the long distance and their state-supported networks. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to pursue things that already exist with existing infrastructure, which will help familiarize people with the concept of rail travel. I mean, you know, growing up, I knew a lot of people in Kentucky that had never taken Amtrak. You know, the few who did were usually from Ashland or familiar with the Cardinal and that line that runs along the eastern side of the state. So it's just some quick facts. Long distance service provides more people and more opportunity to travel to other states and regions. State supported and regional service connects people across their state and to other neighboring states. There's often less construction needed as Amtrak runs on rails that are owned by freight host companies outside of the Northeast. They do own a portion of track in the Northeast, but feasibly there are some limitations, but overall, if there are freight rail lines, there is an opportunity that we should be looking at. Due to Kentucky's unique positioning as sort of a gateway state, it hasn't really been included in like Midwest decision making or Southeast decision making when it comes to regional rail planning. So I think building that robust support, that grassroots support can help to sort of claim a stake of like where we should fit into each rail plan. So I wanted to bring this up. Joe, I'll probably ask you some questions about this as well, since we've got you on the line here. So the FRA has been doing a series of workshops to identify corridors, potential expansion. So what we have here on the large rainbow map is sort of, you can see that the striped lines through Kentucky that sort of don't put it in either camp. And then to the right here, these are frequently traveled routes. So when we're looking at connecting Lexington to Louisville or Cincinnati or Charlotte or beyond, sort of like what the traffic looks like between those areas. Joe, you want to jump in?
Sure. I was actually part of these. So what this map is showing, so there has been this. So this is for the FRA's long distance service study workshops, which our office actually had a big hand in creating the part of the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It was actually creation of these. It started off as actually simply trying to get the Cardinal and the Sunset to actually back to daily service instead of 3 times a week, and it sort of morphed into like the hey, what about all these old lines that Amtrak used to have back pre-1970s that maybe we can look at? And so this is a map of actually the last number of meetings that we had. We're going to have the 3rd and 4th meetings are going to be taking place early next year, and that little map in the corner is actually the travel patterns with highway traffic. So you see a lot of Nashville to Knoxville, not so much Louisville, Cincinnati. But I want to kick back to something that Ned brought up earlier about the having Jim Gray write a letter of interest. It is literally that simple. So there's a separate funding mechanism called the Corridor ID program, which so this is actually for more long distance routes. So this would actually be something that connects Columbus, Cincinnati, Louisville, Nashville, all the way down on this over 750-mile stretch. What the Corridor ID program does, and I'll hit it really briefly because we'll talk about it in a minute too, is that there is grant applications going on right now for phase 1, which we should be able to hear what the pipeline is coming in October, November. And it's going to be a 12-month rolling process. So every year for the 5 years we actually have this funding, you're going to get more projects in the pipeline. And it's as simple as Jim Gray writing a letter to the FRA saying, hey, we want to connect Louisville, Lexington, and Frankfurt on commuter rail. All we want to do is study this. And if you guys are picked, it's $500,000, simple free cash to get for the state to then get consultants to study that. Simple as that. All you have to do is write a letter. It's literally as simple as raising your hand and trying to get money. So that's where, I mean, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's sort of what we're looking at here. There is 2 different mechanisms to really connect you guys.
Thanks, Joe. All right, so what are the roles of transportation cabinet and elected officials in this process? I think Joe did a great job of touching on that, talking about the corridor ID. We are also going to need mayor, city council, chamber of commerce, stakeholders, employers, etc., to sign on and back a letter of interest. I think this is a really great opportunity to get, that grassroots reach and see how many people we can get to support that. Another requirement will be updating the transportation improvement plan. I would encourage you all, if you're not familiar with the statewide transportation improvement plan, to give it a look over. It's, I don't know, 30 something pages, but if you hit Control F on the PDF and type in train, rail, passenger rail, or Amtrak, you get pretty much no results. So getting in with the people who work on this and the people who work under Jim Gray to sort of write all the little bits of this, getting them on board is going to be really, really crucial. So how do we effectively communicate with elected officials? Just aiming for a clear, unified goal, one mission, one message, one purpose. So I think as you all hone in and determine, what light rail service would look like, what state-supported service would look like, how you want to strategically plan to actuate messaging, coordinating with MPOs is going to be really essential. I included just the Lexington Transportation Improvement Program here, but there are a number of tips for the different metropolitan regions. So I think it would totally be worth it, even if you're only looking at light rail, to still communicate with people who do this in Louisville and in Richmond and Georgetown, and see if maybe the light rail, if there's an interest in connecting it to something else when we consider the spoke shape of Lexington and how those other counties are all pulled into, inside of New Circle many times or around the edge of New Circle, sort of what those inclusion plans look like and what their planning entails. If it's extensions of another lane on Georgetown Road, or if it's, a massive construction project around New Circle, how does that affect those other communities around the area? And then these are just key talking points that we use a lot when speaking with representatives, when speaking with senators, governors, mayors. And there is a sort of an unspoken resistance, I think, amongst the pro-coal community and people who have worked for or with RJ Corman in the past. And so these are just sort of some common points that we use to dispel the anti-rail rhetoric that is very much ingrained in a lot of the lobbying that goes against passenger rail. The keys being economic and environmental, public safety and enrichment, and more connectivity equals more employment opportunities. So by taking these points where some people you may speak to are not going to care about the environmental impact, some people are going to care about it quite a bit. Some people are going to look at the price tag and whip out one of our favorite words and call rail a boondoggle, because they just don't have that long-term vision to see how it's going to create more jobs. This gives people an opportunity to, start developing career-long skills, regardless of what capacity in rail they work. We've done a number of webinars where we talk about people who aren't necessarily railroaders, but they're tangential investment, and how having rail as part of their community has drawn them into becoming a champion for it. People that work in marketing, in business, in communications, planning, it's not just the jobs created that's like build the track, have someone run the train. It's all of the other things that it connects to. And we've done a number of studies too about the economic benefits, including like job creation, increased tourism spending, tax revenue. Joe, I think you could speak to that a little bit if you're interested.
Yeah, so we actually have and I could share with you guys through the Facebook group or email that you guys can see, or actually you can go to our websites. I forgot what I'm the one who creates these things, but it's railpastors.org. I think it's like reports. We've actually over the last couple of years we have this in-plan modeling where we can actually put in region-wide, statewide, even down to the county level, just average income, things like that, and we can figure out exactly how much, conservative estimates, what rail service would actually bring to a community, to a county, down to direct and indirect benefits, tax benefits, the less wear and tear on the roads, um, as much it would actually save in that way too. So it's those, all the different benefits, but that's so that is something down the line. Things like that unfortunately aren't free. But I can show you guys examples, and if we get to the point one day where you actually have like a local chamber of commerce that really wants to get into this and really wants to be like, hey, we can use that data. That's actually something we can actually produce for you guys on a county level. So it is sort of long term. Based on what I heard from your introductions earlier, this is not a short term thing. You guys are in it for the long haul. You guys are in it to win this. You guys want to see this happen. So there's definitely something we can actually kind of look at down the line.
Yeah. So just to get those brains, creatively thinking, we're going to talk about some comparable service models, and I would encourage all of you to give these a Google, look at sort of how their route is laid out, what the operational costs are, what the ridership demographics, frequency of ridership. And these are ones I specifically pulled because if we're looking, at Lexington or Louisville as, the two larger cities, what kind of benefits and what kind of rail would work best. And I promise you all, one day I will teach Joe how to say Louisville correctly. We're getting there. So the first two that come to mind are the Hop in Milwaukee and the streetcar in Kansas City. So both of these had an initial footprint and then did expand, did increase frequencies, did increase number of employees pretty quickly. So these are both towns that have about 500,000 people. I believe in Lexington, we're right at like 394. So talking about that sort of anticipation of growth that you all were talking about in your introductions, like these are the kinds of visions that we should be having to anticipate that growth. In Milwaukee, since the Hop has gone into service, there's been a marked and noticeable reduction in DUIs in the area serviced. Milwaukee had a number of issues with like DUIs, especially in their downtown area for many years. And I think this is, a comparable problem that we see in Lexington frequently, after sporting events, anything big at Rupp Arena, there's always that risk that someone's going to choose to drive while impaired. And so providing people an alternative has just been really, really important to public safety. There has been noticeably less traffic congestion and also less issues with parking. More often than not, when people are given the option to opt into taking rail and just leaving the car at home, it's just such a headache reducer, and it makes room for people that have to drive to be able to use those spots as well. In Kansas City, Joe, honestly, I think you hardly have a better grasp on this than me, since you were just there and watching the rapid economic growth that's happening in the Power and Light District and connecting neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, we were in Kansas City for our fall conference last October, and it's actually pretty amazing. So I forgot the actual mileage. Kansas City, the streetcar, and almost immediately, the the main connector is from the downtown train station, Union Station, all the way up through like kind of their main stretch, their bar and restaurant area. But they've now seen businesses come in, especially even like post pandemic. Actually, they have businesses coming into downtown instead of them losing to the suburbs. They're expanding I forgot if it's I forgot the orientation of the map. I think it's actually technically going north to the riverfront. Kansas City is actually, they're already expanding the light rail, the streetcar, and it's something along the lines of like $8 billion in economic benefits and give back to the area, where they're now building, I think, the country's first sole women's soccer stadium on the riverfront, simply because, and it's gonna be a concert center as well, simply because the streetcar is that popular. I guess the team was looking for a spot, and the city is like, we have location, we have the benefits, we have the money coming in, we can handle this. And simply because of the expansion of the streetcar, they are now seeing stadiums being built around the population. So it is very popular. It's seeing growth. And it was my first time ever in Kansas City, and it was very impressive to kind of see what they're doing, because you see a lot of other cities. They're like, oh, Cincinnati, oh, we got a streetcar, no one uses it, no one likes it. And then you see a place like Kansas City is like, oh, we have examples, we can prove you otherwise. So it's kind of cool to see the growth of what can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, kind of think back to it was like right around, I think, 2008 to 2010. Like, there was a trolley program in downtown Lexington. At the time, I was living at the corner of like Upper and Limestone, so I got to watch the trolley go by all the time. And I think it really just proves that, like, the interest exists, the routes exist. And, both of these cities, I will say, are a little bit flatter than Lexington, which does make that streetcar mapping a little bit easier. But we've already kind of tested the concept through downtown. So yeah, I would encourage you all, look at these routes, look at these numbers, keep these in mind. Another model I would like to just mention is regional service. I think it's going to be a long process to get light rail in Lexington. I'm not saying it's impossible, just that it's lengthy. But with the current funding structure, there are great opportunities to start looking at how to connect, like, Louisville, Frankfort, Georgetown, Lexington, Richmond, just kind of filling in that line across the Central Bluegrass, and two states that have, smaller population than Kentucky, with an equal number of geographical challenges. That's one of the arguments that I hear made against passenger rail is, like, oh, is it feasible because we've got all these hills and hollers? Well, New Mexico has insane plateaus and crazy drop-offs and massive elevation changes along the Rail Runner route. It serves rural communities, it serves reservations, gets people from, Santa Fe down to Albuquerque, up through the central part of the state. So I think this would be for those of you who are interested in regional rail, this would be a really, really good one to just take a look at. Their ridership has progressively grown, and they do a fare free month. I think it's August, but they do it like twice a year. There's one in the winter and one in the summer where they do like a fare free month, and ridership during their fare free times just off the charts. I mean, we're seeing 165%, 200% of what normal ridership looks like during those fare free times. Other comparable regional service is the Downeaster. This runs from Boston up through coastal Maine. And I think this is another, I did a documentary on this in 2019. It's on our YouTube channel. I'll be sure to link you guys. But Wayne Davis was the man who led the Citizens Initiative to take this sort of half-used freight line and put a gorgeous regional train together. So you get to carve, up from Boston up into coastal Maine. The views are amazing. It's incredibly popular. It's definitely like, a huge tourist draw. And, when we've worked with Wayne Davis and the people who started the Downeaster pretty frequently, and they talked about just having that tourism money coming in, during the fall, the leaves are changing. And I could totally see, people using this as a means to come to Keeneland, to, start looking at what breweries and what distilleries are in the area. And it has a very similar footprint to kind of the size that we would be looking at traversing through Kentucky if we we're going to connect Louisville to Indianapolis, Cincinnati to Lexington, etc. So I think those are both great to look at. And then Virginia is like currently experiencing this like huge economic boom, and they've pushed really, really hard to commit to rail and develop the Commonwealth Corridor. This is, you know, a neighboring state, and I think it's really great to be able to hop on for those of you that are looking to go out in the field and do a little bit of field work. But there are a series of, you know, like access to public transportation via these routes. And Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about the rail enhancement fund? 'Cause I think that structure with working with state governance is something that our people at home would probably really appreciate.
Yeah, it was the and mind you, this is sort of like just what I remember, because what are the chairwoman of our board of directors is actually is from Virginia. Actually was responsible, Meredith Richards actually responsible for a lot of this. She actually has an award named after her that's given out to a woman in rail in the state of Virginia every year. So we're honored to have her as our chair. It's one of those things I wish I had her notes to tell you guys about this. But the state of Virginia, as Ned said, is seeing sort of a renaissance in this. This is all Amtrak services, all state support service, but they Amtrak, the federal government, and the Commonwealth have put in like $7.5 billion through this enhancement fund that was initially founded in 2006, but it's part of their state rail plan, which actually Ned mentioned earlier about actually getting rail added to the Kentucky plan. This is actually part of their state rail plan, where it is a solely dedicated fund. Just as you see for state highway funds, trust funds, or airport funds, or things like that. This is dedicated money solely for rail, and it has actually allowed Amtrak to work with the states. And the Commonwealth of Virginia has actually recently purchased. This is their second or third purchase, I believe. They just purchased an additional like 30 miles of track, so they can control it, they can fix it up, and they can actually use it to expand. I want to say it's that New River Valley Roanoke section that they're actually planning. They just bought that from the freight rail, so they could then add it to their trying to think of the word, inventory of tracks, so they can basically determine what they want to do with it, so they can actually run more service to it, so they can control the schedule. And I think, as Ned said, being a neighbor to you guys, this really is an example that I give to any state around the country is look at what Virginia's doing. I know that is something they've been working on for decades, but really is sort of like a shining light, and it's right next door to you guys, to kind of like really talk to people in the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. There's a couple passenger rail nonprofit groups that work in and out of the Commonwealth as well that you can kind of connect to and be like, hey, how'd you guys do this? And sit down. Maybe even that could be a next step for you guys, is actually have somebody we can kind of connect you guys with, have someone give a presentation to you guys, you know, in another future meeting.
Yeah. So next steps, studies. These are just, you know, some, oh, whoops, looks like I have a typo there. My apologies. So yeah, these are just like the last couple slides. We're going to go over like length of time, requirements, and how to form a constructive base. So we had a meeting with our Vice President of Government Affairs and Policy yesterday, just to sort of talk about timelines. And this is something that he had shared with us, which is just sort of averaging out what that EIS completion timeline is like. It is different for different communities, but it is definitely a multi-year process. We kind of looked at, I think it was 5 to 10 would probably be a realistic time frame to complete studies and prepare to actually start looking at building. But without a clear path forward, the timeline does extend. So again, getting in with the MPOs, updating the tip, getting those letters of recommendation, those can all help to kind of push that path forward. You know, I mean, light rail, it's different in every city. Every city has its unique challenges. So I think just at this point in your advocacy, working to identify what those challenges are early and becoming as like policy literate as possible. Definitely have somebody within your organization that's reading the many long pages of PDFs. Feel free to email us if they're super confusing. That's kind of why I go to the VP, because I am frequently confused by many big words. So we talked about that a little bit. And then he had shared this, which is, so you're pursuing a transit project. This came from a citizens primer on Federal News Starts. I would be glad to share that with you all. I think it's just a really easy, straightforward primer. And I think kind of where you all are at is maybe getting up to like step 3 or 4. I think that's a reasonable goal for a grassroots group, is to talk to Jim Gray, people in the transportation cabinet, and start getting that draft EIS done. Joe, do you have any thoughts, any advice you want to share on this one?
No, I think this when Sean sent this to us, I think this is a great and I said and I would absolutely highly recommend Ned just automatically email it to you guys in the group.
Yeah.
This is really is something that I wish we kind of came up with ourselves as a primer.
Yeah, right.
I have no notes. This is something that it's really smartly done and actually really does show you guys realistically what to expect when it comes to, because it is. It's a lot of bureaucracy. It's a lot of red tape, not just from the state level, but from the federal level when it comes to FTA programs, which I do believe we have a slide coming up with what to look for before we wrap up here. But yeah, this is a great kind of document for you guys.
Yeah, I'll be sure to share that. But I mean, if we're looking at step 1, this is a 1 to 5 year process. Step 2 is at the speed of federal government. Step 3 is a 15 to 30 month process. So, committing to long-term advocacy and trying to keep the public positive, I think is really, really crucial in getting from like ideation to, preliminary steps for studies and engineering developments. So, let's keep it upbeat. What can we do to build and increase support? Obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't invite everyone I've ever met to join the Rail Passengers Association. We've been doing this for over half a century. You're in good hands. We have a number of Amtrak discounts that come with membership. And if you choose to join, you're immediately supporting the work that we do on Capitol Hill and, on lovely Sunday afternoons like this for communities all across the US. So I think Facebook group is an awesome start. Obviously, you guys are generating a lot of traction. And as you said, things are going viral, always a good sign. So kind of getting into an organized like state group, I think would be the best way to drive, a project in Lexington or a project in Louisville, but having each other's back in that kind of greater sense and saying to your Louisville friends, support this work. Because then when you come and visit us, whether, in the future you can do it by train or you have to drive, down 64 and the massive construction that is always the interstate between Louisville and Lexington, like having those partners in neighboring towns will just strengthen your coalition. And it shows them, look, if Lexington can do it, why can't Georgetown do it? Why can't Louisville do it? Why can't Richmond do it? So I think, working on that, one of our models, a model affiliate group that we would recommend reaching out to is All Aboard Ohio. They have been really, really great at both championing like transit-oriented development in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, while also pursuing means of rail to connect them with more frequencies. I think that the way that they interact with news and media is really great. They just have like a really facts-driven, just straightforward. They don't get tied up into the emotionality of it. It's just good, clean data delivered by passionate advocates. And just continuing to spread the word as your messaging becomes more cohesive. So look at what are key missions. What are the most mission critical things? Maybe as you break out and enjoy the coffee and cookies I wish I was having right now after this presentation, look and kind of listen and hear what key phrases people are repeating, what they're getting excited about, and that'll really, really help to frame out messaging while waiting out a somewhat arduous federal process. So I think that's it for us. If you want to follow along on social media, we're at Rail Passengers. You can find us on every platform except for TikTok. If you're interested in donating or joining, railpassengers.org is our website. My email's at the bottom. If you have any questions that we aren't able to address in the Q&A, I will be sure to post this video on our website, as well as our YouTube channel, and make sure that everybody gets those links. I'll just add them into the page as we're hosting. So we'll make sure you have your primers. Feel free to peruse our website as well. Like I said, we've been doing this for over half a century. So we've got a lot of materials, free webinars, free resources you can pull from as you start to develop your group and see where this takes you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think we can open the floor to questions. I'm not seeing any Q&A submitted from our viewers at home. So if you all in the room have questions you'd like to share with us.
Okay, so we're going to do our best, see if the microphone picks up your question, but if not, I will be repeating it. So what questions you all have? There's a lot of information there. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, you had a time range in there of 5 to 10 years from ideation to completion. Does that mean ideation and then the first rail passenger stepping on a rail car that's going to take him to Frankfurt, Louisville, Georgetown, whatever? Is that 10 years actually, a time? Have they done this before in 10 years? Somewhere else.
Do you need that repeated?
I think I actually heard so the question was the 10-year timeline going from like where you guys are at now to actual revenue service, correct?
Basically.
Okay. I guess like as Ned said earlier, it depends on projects. I would actually have to I need to go back and actually research exactly how long, something along the lines of like the Downeaster from Boston to Portland, Maine. How long that took from the citizens petition to actually having the train running. That said, they already had the tracks there. It just needed to be upgraded. They had to find the funding. But when it comes to something along the lines of light rail, examples could be look at out in Arizona, how long that's actually taken them to go from their citizens, kind of like advocacy groups like you guys, to actual like shovel ready projects to train service running. It's all going to depend on what infrastructure is already in place. So that could actually go from that 8 to 10 year process to potentially even 10, 15 years, all depends on what service you're talking about. But I would say just conservative, you're probably looking at about a decade for the ribbon cutting, us coming down there and being on the ceremonial first train kind of thing.
Very good. What other questions we have? Yes.
You talked about like successful examples in like Kansas City. So if we were going to start smaller and move out with like streetcars to begin with, but then you also did mention Cincinnati, which for its population is not that successful. Do you have any idea of what the difference was between the projects or why that happened? Like, because, this is expensive. And so you definitely don't want it to fail.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a unique situation in Cincinnati. I really think doing it strategically, looking at having service to places that are busy, that are, highly frequented. So to me, like in Lexington, it would make sense to connect like major employers' stadium campus, right? But I think how different towns choose to go about developing that, like we are both in Minneapolis, for instance, and they're in the process of extending our metro line right now, because there's a series of communities to the southwest and to the northeast that have just grown much faster than I think city planners 25 years ago anticipated. So I think it's just really about, making strategic decisions then, and then tactically embracing your ridership, marketing the product that's available. Like, I don't feel like I ever really went to Cincinnati and was like, oh, the streetcar, but you go to New Orleans and it's iconic. It's ingrained into the culture. So I think, thinking through how communities are engaged will be a big part of determining how likely it is to be successful. And if nobody knows about it or is excited about it, they're not going to use it. You know, we've seen like Phoenix is another great example where they're slowly but surely continuing to expand, and it's all because they're making the right decisions about what neighborhoods they're going into with what kind of service, when and where and why. Joe?
Yeah, and the sort of like case study with Cincinnati is look at Cincinnati's history of the rail. I mean, they had streetcar tracks as much as they had streets. I mean, it was everywhere. But the problem is they ripped half of that up. I mean, my hometown Chicago also in and out of the stockyards we had streetcars everywhere. You can still see the old tracks, but it's viewed as like a bygone era, which we all know, and we're seeing a renaissance of streetcar, light rail, all the way up to heavy rail in this country, or at least from the advocacy level, thanks to funding. But you really have to have trains that go where people want to go, and Cincinnati is a case study of what not to do. Like, so the Amtrak train, they have this beautiful Union Station that the Amtrak train goes twice a day at like 2-3 in the morning. They have a streetcar that doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't match with employment sectors. It doesn't match with entertainment sectors. It's infrequent. So they sort of just like it's a study of like, well, we have it, but like, oh well, we have it. We just deal with this. If you really want someone to use it, it needs to go where people are. And I think the case in Kansas City is what they're doing the right way, what Cincinnati can be doing all along. They just sort of decided to give up on it.
Yeah, and I think having elected officials who are well educated on the benefits of rail is super helpful. Because if you have a city council that's just like, oh, that old thing, we don't really use it anymore, like I guess the tourists can come ride on it or whatever, as opposed to engaging and being like, wow, this is such a huge opportunity to drive our economy. But if you don't know, you don't know, right? Like, I'm not going to shame anybody for being ignorant to it, but do keep in mind that for every, advocate like Joe, myself, like y'all, there's also lobbyists who are constantly working to, make it seem like the train brings in crime, or they say these like, low-key dog whistles to try to encourage like less public transportation. So I think just making sure that you're also talking to people who are decision makers for what that route and schedule will look like and how it can serve communities is pretty crucial.
Yeah, and not to derail questioning, but actually a good example of that is Nashville. Nashville had outside dark money and a scandal with the mayor completely destroy any chance they had of actually build what you guys are trying to do, build brand new service. They wanted a commuter rail, they wanted light rail, they wanted a multi-level system, and a weird personal scandal absolutely helped destroy any chance of actual like public benefit. So it's just having those community leaders that actually do care.
Yeah, the oil lobbyists are not just made up boogeymen. They're very real, and we combat their misinformation on a daily basis. So,
Did you have a follow-up or you get it?
Oh, no, I mean, that was great in addition to, I was just curious, so in Lexington, that would be, because I know you're from the area, but like, so you would say target things like Rubber Arena, Commonwealth Stadium, the UK hospital complex, places people already want to go, the airport, the distillery district.
Yeah.
And then hope that in the long term, you can connect maybe areas that are like transportation poor, but don't target those initially. Like, I'm curious to like, social impact versus like, alleviating traffic. So therefore going places people, maybe Fayette Mall, maybe you put a station.
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. If I never had to drive in that Fayette Mall parking lot again, my life would be every Christmas I come home and I'm like, I know I'm going to hit Nicholasville and New Circle and I'm just going to start crying.
Even I know that traffic. That's how bad it is.
So target high traffic areas before you try to use it as like an engine for equity in the community, something like that. So that first it becomes successful and viable, and then you
I think it inherently will build equity, because especially, I think about my mom works over there where all those hospitals are on Nicholasville Road, right? And she lives in Georgetown and drives 45 minutes both ways every day. Yeah. Like, having even just like a hop on and off or something, like if she could drive and do a park and ride from the distillery district over there? I know she would, and I know a bunch of other people would. And, you know, like as the BCTC network expands, like as KCTCS expands, right, there's still people that are going to want to go to traditional campus or have to go to a traditional campus in order to do paperwork and whatnot. So if you knew, say you live over like, you know, Tate's Creek or off of Malibu, somewhere over there, if you could walk up, get on at the mall, successfully go to campus, you know, go downtown, come back, like that's an instant equity builder. And with the expansion of LexTran, I don't see any reason that there couldn't be routing to supplement light rail and kind of provide a last mile solution for a number of the neighborhoods on the north side. And, you know, like off of Versailles Road, there's a lot of that that's just not super accessible unless you're going by car. So I think, you know, just compounding the equity and using existing infrastructure and existing transportation methods to supplement can get you to a place where that equity conversation makes sense. It just inherently is part of it.
Thank you.
Will you go ahead and introduce yourself and then go ahead and.
Sure. I'm Dan Wu, I'm Vice Mayor of Lexington, and I'm sorry, I came in late to this presentation. I literally missed 99% of it, but this is a subject that I'm very interested in. I've done a little bit of kind of digging myself, and I think your point about getting the buy-in of city council and local government, I think is a really important piece. I will say, speaking for our 50-member city council, I don't think most of us know enough about this subject. So I would love to see you all or any other organization kind of give us a presentation on it and kind of why it makes sense. My question is, what has your experience been dealing with the state? Because a lot of the roads that we can envision light rail on are also state roads. Any of our major, you know, Nichols Road, Winchester Road, all these major road arteries are state roads. So we always have to deal with the state transportation cabinet. What has your experience been in kind of navigating that local versus state partnership?
Yeah, well, it has been very much a mixed bag. I have had some transportation cabinet people be incredibly dismissive, like right off the bat. And these are people that are, you know, pro coal or kind of in that like RJ Corman pocket, and that's where their loyalty lies. I've also had a handful of people say, I just don't know anything about this. It's never been part of our tip. There's no MPOs that, you know, are showing us any evidence that this planning is essential. So what makes it essential? And I have no issue meeting people where they're at and like answering those kinds of questions, but I would, you know, I would be kind of dissuading you all to like a false level of joy if I said that there aren't people that like actively want us to like shut up and not pursue any of this. So, you know, but I mean, it's the state government, right? So there's a handful of good old boys that are going to feel as they do about this. And those people I think are, you know, influenced by commerce, by the dollars going in and out, and don't really have the long-term vision to support actuating something that's more beneficial for the citizens.
And my example of this would be when I was living in Massachusetts, working on projects with when I was in grad school, working on some volunteer projects for the MBTA, things like that. There is a sense, especially in Western Massachusetts, because they're not connected. They're the only connection right now between Western Massachusetts and Boston is a one-a-day train from Amtrak. The Lakeshore Limited actually goes from Chicago to Boston and New York, and the politicians out in Western Mass, there are a handful of them that actually want to see commuter rail extended all the way out to Springfield, so they can have their residents and their voters finally get a buy-in, because there's so many of those the politicians, the state officials, even those in the state DOT that only see this as, why am I wasting my taxpayer money on something I can't access out in Boston? That's a Boston problem. That's a Boston thing. It should be Boston taxes. But the one thing they don't realize is, and actually part of getting the buy-in is when people start seeing Lexington years from now with their bright new shiny economic driving light rail is other places are going to be like, hey, we want some of that. We want to get in on that because they'll see there's tax money coming in. When people are actually starting to come into the city, but getting hotel rooms because they're not driving back and forth from Rupp Arena for Kentucky Louisville games. I'm trying to get better on that. Is that they'll start seeing economic buy-in. They'll start seeing that there's tax money, state money coming into taxes to hotels, to restaurants, and that's really where you sort of like grab them. That's the buy-in. Well, yes, we understand people in the western half of the states are not going to see the benefits, but they'll start seeing more money come in if they and we know that some of the people that are actually going to benefit the most from a robust public transit are the ones that'll never use it. When I was working on projects in Massachusetts, we actually tried to get the local office of AAA in Providence, Rhode Island, to actually be one of our sponsors, because we know that the more money, the more robust public transit is, the less wear and tear on the roads. The people that actually have to be in their car because you're not going to get people who are, say you guys build out commuter rail that goes Louisville, Lexington, Frankfort, Georgetown, that whole kind of like region. The people that will benefit the most are the ones that actually have to be in their work truck every day, because there's less maintenance, there's less wear and tear, there's less accidents, less issues on the roads, and they'll benefit the most. So that's how you get buy-in from even the most naysayers. So when it comes to the state officials, is you start using that, hey, like the people in your area, your voters who won't see this benefit, but will actually get some tax benefits from it. That's how you start selling it to other places, parts of the state. And it's actually how you start selling it to people who actually are kind of running the DOTs, who are running the highway departments.
Yeah, and as far as as far as like the state road thing goes too, I'm thinking of like 27 specifically as something that would just be like a headache to tear up, and there would be a lot of drama involved in that process, I'm sure. But like I had pitched maybe like 12 years ago bus rapid transit and had done some mapping back when I was a wee little student. But I had done some mapping and just kind of showed like, okay, so if we had like a central hub, like the one that already exists for the bus station in Lexington, but like, if we had the central hub and BRT out the spokes to all of the counties surrounding, so there is something in Georgetown, Versailles, Nicholasville, etc. Like how would that not already show that the concept works, right? Like I think it's an immediate step in feasibility, because there will be people that are going to say, this just doesn't seem feasible. But if you're already seeing that ridership through bus rapid transit, and then being able to supplement that with light rail or with commuter rail, I think you can get some good numbers on what passenger demographics would look like, what satellite towns are most frequently using the service before any construction actually begins on a light rail. So it's just something to think about, because I'm sure the state road drama will be abundant.
Did
Can I follow up real quick?
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
So I serve on the board of the MPO's Transportation Policy Committee as well. And I also serve on the board for Commerce Lex. And one of the things that our chamber has been talking a lot about is the idea of regionalism and this sort of economic promotion for our 9-county area.
Yeah.
You're talking about ties right into that. So I would love to connect with you all and have you all present to Commerce Lex and or MPO. So
Totally.
Absolutely, would love to.
Yeah, there's so much going on right now too with FTA and like creating equity, and like transit is not just rail. We're pro transit in every capacity. Just because this is the one that we're in doesn't mean there's not also other things that would make sense to supplement and encourage more robust public transportation, period. So
yeah, because one of the things that we come across, especially with all these different studies, it's not just say getting rail to a place like Atlanta. It's Atlanta, Savannah, Charlotte, Nashville. It's
Mhm.
regionalization. It really is like one city can no longer do it on this, because especially with, you see the suburban patterns, people moving back and forth, especially now the post-pandemic world, people are leaving the cities again, going like you really need to build out where people are.
So, I've been looking at the transit map basically for Louisville or for Lexington for 25 years, and talking about it with people and trying to get rail, thinking that it's a great idea. And everything I can find says it's not a good idea if we only look at the city. We have to look at the region. It's not supportable. Lexington can't afford it. All those kinds of things. We don't have control of the state roads. We can't go, Lexington can't go into another county, right?
Yeah.
All this, we have to have that regional outlook. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Louisville, which is a larger city, population-wise and geographically, right, has been trying to get light rail for 25 years and gone nowhere. So what would we have to do differently than what they're doing in order to get this even off the ground at all?
Yeah, well, I think it's also a matter of timing, because with the bipartisan infrastructure law, I mean, this really is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I just don't think that the same kind of like funding and having like the FTA that we have now just didn't exist 25 years ago. So I think, looking at just this window of opportunity we have contextually, I would just want to pursue as much as possible in all facets. I don't know, Joe, thoughts?
Not really knowing the struggles of Louisville with and the light rail. Actually, I would love to actually like kind of like look into that. I didn't know that they were actually struggling for that. But as Ned said, this really is, it's so like all the like the $66 billion that we keep hearing for like Amtrak and passenger rail and all the stuff from that bill. Also, have to remember it's a $1.7 trillion total bill. Like, so there, I mean, like Brightline's trying to get some money. We're starting to see some of the money being spent in, and that's actually one of the things that my boss really warned about, this whole idea of like just need the state DOTs to raise their hand and say, we want part of this, we want to be part of this, is because the one thing we don't want to see is we don't want to see all the money go to California, to New York for the gateway. Now we're going to start seeing some money go to Baltimore for the Baltimore Potomac, the
BMP.
the tunnels. Florida's going to see some for Brightline. We don't want just that to be on the code. We want to see like places like Idaho is standing up and trying to get some money for funding. Utah is trying to expand their own their own commuter rail, the RTA around the states. So it's not just the big money places that are starting to see some money, but this really is a once in a life, as Ned said, once in a lifetime opportunity to really strike and actually get at least everything off the ground. And create these groups better than we ever had. So
Yeah.
If Louisville was trying to do their light rail project now, I think it'd be a whole lot different story than it was 25 years ago.
Yeah, and getting back the feasibility studies, the economic incentives, things like that can help to contextualize and give those people who may be more resistant, because I think a very common misconception is like, okay, it's going to cost all this money and then we got to operate this service. And so with state supported regional service, we've seen where, like through the Gulf Coast restoration's going on right now. Louisiana was the first state to say, we've got the money, we're ponying up. Absolutely. Mississippi met them where they were at. Alabama kind of like drug heel, but eventually threw in a couple $1 million. But because of like the federal support that they're going to get in relaunching this service, the price tag is not what it would be if it was just them on their own. So, I've heard that too from members of the transportation cabinet, which is, we've got great freight rail. We don't need passenger rail. It's just another expense. It's another headache. We don't have the budget for it. But we would have the budget for it if 80% of the expenses are covered by federal grants and there's continuous operation grant funding, and we have a 5-year stretch to like slowly look at additional grants, disbursement, pacing of these projects. So I just feel like it truly is a very, very different time frame right now than it has been historically. I think it was 2003 when the Kentucky Cardinals stopped running to Louisville. A lot of that was due to both state and federal budget cuts. And since we're seeing the opposite of that now, which is spend it, spend it, spend it, spend it, I think, the incentive to just get in there and see what's possible should be explored.
Yeah, we spend millions upon millions of dollars per mile on highways in this country, and no one bats an eye. Look at
Airports.
And airport, but when you ask for a quarter of that for a transit project, everyone's like, no, we can't do that. No, we don't have the money for it. But yeah, it's
yeah, like what's the Mountain Parkway expansion going to cost? Like we're adding another lane to the Mountain Parkway.
Yeah.
So that's, it's long, it's arduous. It's like, the topography of that stretch of road is rough. So, if there's support for projects like that, why shouldn't there be support for projects that have a smaller footprint, provide a much greater economic return, create jobs long-term? So, I think it's kind of wrap around the timing and the ethos.
Okay, we got more questions here. Woman in the back, please.
I'm Anna from Path or Kentucky Path. We're working on an inner city transit line with Amtrak from Cincinnati to Atlanta. And one of the questions that I had was about which pot we get money from for the kind of regional commuter rail that you're talking about. In other states, is that money coming from the state transportation budget, which is funded by gas taxes, or is it coming from the general fund?
The confusion on my face. So actually that would be a question I would actually have to go directly to Sean, our VP, because I do believe when it comes to federal I know that the Amtrak money, the grants programs are coming from the FRA. The commuter rail transit city projects would be like there is extra FTA grant funding available, like new starts, fast starts, things like that. But when it comes actually what the money from the state's matching, like that 20% match or whatever it is, I don't know exactly. It all depends on how the state mechanisms are when it comes to getting that money.
Yeah, because there's been a split in whether budget approval or budget rewriting has happened. Like we had that in Minnesota, right? So they tore in and completely changed how the transit budget was going to be henceforth because of funding that was received. And I know a couple of other states have done it. So it's kind of case by case, but if you all want that support, I would be glad to put you all in touch with our VP. He's a real smart guy who's been going through, the Tiger grants, the Chrissy grants, separating what's FTA, what's FRA, what's blanket DOT, and sort of how those allocation substructures are adhered to. So yeah, I can definitely reach out to him with that question.
Thank you.
Another question.
My name's Ron Taub. I'm with one of the businesses that operate here local. I know the state's already starting to try and get on the front end of transition with the proverbial runaway train that's coming at us with switching from gas cars to electric.
Mm-hmm.
As we phase that down, which Kentucky's got probably one of the best maintained highway systems in the eastern United States, what travel I've made. And as you drive that budget up from shutting the fuel tax down, that will, we would see major push from the oil company part lobbying not to have the light rail because you're going to cut the travel fares down. But just the addition here in Lexington of the growth that we've seen on Newtown Pike projects, just the addition of those extra lights have added a half hour's drive to my transition from Winchester to Lexington.
Yeah,
And I mean, to go from doubling your drive time to where over the past years, I've tried to contact and see why Lextran could not run bus route from Lexington to Winchester. And they say it stops at the line.
Yeah.
You can't go past the county line, but, I mean, with the country switching, something's gotta be done in this major, I mean, we're going into uncharted areas now, to where before you had the old reliable car that you could get in and go from here to California. Well, that's coming to a real quick end, because if the powers that be push the fuel prices so high that you can't drive it, and they wanna go to electric, which won't go that far. I mean,
Yeah.
at current technology, I mean, even the Ford executive that tried to do the long road trip, the mess that that's created. I mean, you can move masses by a central station quicker, just like what happens in Japan. I mean, without Japan's rail industry, that country could not exist. I mean, their light rail, we need to reach out and pull from operations that are operating successful and bring that into ideas that could be used here, which you could start out with a trunk line and then involve Flextran to do test routes. I mean, they could run buses from here to all our satellite towns, and okay, whichever one would be the highest loaded, yeah, you could go ahead and run a light rail to that town.
There any other questions in the room?
I have one actually. So what's been your experience working with railroad companies? Like I know Norfolk Southern is infamously difficult to contact sometimes.
yeah. I think it's kind of been all over the map. It depends on size and what the ask is. You know, we mostly work with Amtrak Government Affairs, so it's their responsibility and their onus. We mostly just advise what we think is best for the passenger. I've found historically CSX to be very, very difficult to work with, and Norfolk Southern to be very difficult to work with. UP, it pretty much seems like they're more direct and like this is the price to play, basically. They tell you more straightforward, I think, what they're expecting of service providers who are going to use their tracks. I would expect a ton of resistance from RJ Corman. I just historically have found them difficult to work with when I've worked on other projects in the region. So definitely something to be aware of. But like in the instance with Gulf Coast Restoration, why is that so hard to say? The CSX has not been a great partner. There's been a ton of back and forth with the Surface Transportation Board. Regardless of the fact that 95% of the people on that route are like, let's go for it. We've got the funding, we've got the plan, we've got our stations built. But the Port of Mobile has been like their point of contention. And I don't think it's really fair to make the argument that one passenger train going through there each way once a day is enough to disrupt all of commerce in the Port of Mobile. And so that was a really lengthy judicial arbitration process. Like it took a lot longer than I think any of us were expecting. So I would definitely talk to extensive legal counsel about what experience has been like for other companies that have worked with the people who work for those groups in the region.
Yeah. And then you have the example of the merger CPKC, who immediately, I mean, and I know it's lip service because they wanted to get Amtrak's approval on their merger as a sign off, but we're going to start seeing potential passenger rail between like more regional rail between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. All because CP's like, yeah, we make money on this. Like Amtrak, the federal government pays us for track fees. Like we get to charge them to use our tracks. So we make money on this. So like, why not? Like we can figure this out. And there are instances, especially with Down Easter, actually there is one section where actually like it's I forgot, it's like MBTA owns the track, and then it's like a couple short line. So like RJ Corman-ish companies own a couple bits like through New Hampshire, and then it's another freight rail up to through Maine. So there's it really is, as Ned said, is a mixed bag. But there have been, especially if you make the economic case, there have been, you know, freight rails that will come to the table and actually will at least listen to you.
That's good.
Okay, so this has been really fruitful. So much wonderful information. This has been recorded, so and it's going to go up on your YouTube channel. Is that correct, or am I missing?
It'll be YouTube and on our website. I'll make sure that we get that link into the group as soon as it's up. That'll be first thing on my to-do list in the morning, putting together our primer materials and making sure you all have the resources and answers to the questions today in a nice, easy to read place.
Great, with your contact information so we can get it to the mayor's office also. I just want to put another plug in for RPA. They have spent an incredible amount of time to do this, and we are so grateful. I think the best way that we could choose that we show our gratitude is become members, because this organization like this cannot do this without membership. Of course, we're going to, you know, probably have some fundraising within our own circles, but these people need the money. They're doing the work. They're talking to the representatives. So be sure to hop over to their website. And I hope you will put that also, and so that we can talk to our email group and our Facebook group of becoming members. So let's give them a round of applause of thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And let me say on my behalf, it's what I do with the nature of my job, my role is I listened to you guys the introduction earlier, the page going viral, the news taking over, and you guys getting members. Let me say my hat's off to you guys. I've been doing this for quite some time, and there's nothing makes me smile more in my job on a national level than seeing actual honest to God grassroots. And literally from the ground up. So like legit from like where we're sitting in our roles, like absolutely, like I applaud you guys for your work, what you guys have been able to do so far. So yeah, hats off. And I'm looking forward to coming down and maybe visiting with Ned's family, and then coming down and meet some of you guys in person one day too. So
Would love
Yeah.
it. Love it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be
thank you
home next month. Can't wait to do a meeting in person. It'll be great.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
thank you.